Oh, we're live. See, there
Yay.
we go. Not having an intro. Welcome to Reignite, everybody. This is our second episode back after my break and kind of revamping and restructuring what I want to give here. And I'm just very excited for all of you to join us. Going to have an amazing conversation today. But Reignite is where people, men and women, are going to be sharing testimonies have how they've walked through the fires of life and how God has shaped their life, their purpose, their calling. And today we have Casey McPherson, and I'm so honored to have you here. You have an amazing story, starting with a really cool career in music. You've been on the Billboard charts before. You're two bands, Alpha Rev and Flying Colors. And I bet a lot of people would remember those songs from back in the day. And I think that's really, really incredible. But then you have a daughter named Rose, and she was born with a very rare genetic condition that causes her to not be able to speak, have seizures and developmental delays. I know it was hard for her to start walking too. And so now you have actually started a biotech company that creates medications and drugs to actually correct these rare genetic disorders. And I think that's absolutely incredible. And I can't wait to dive into that, your life, your music, the transition from music to biotech, which is just like incredible. Um, so I'm going to hand it over to you. Kind of let's just dive into your story. First, I want to ask you one question though. Um, where do you think God is stretching you in your life right now?
Well, I mean, there's sort of been a theme in my life where uh, I have, as a creator, and you're taking risks all the time, there's a temptation to mitigate that risk, like every human does, and sort of play God. So, if we can get enough money and enough power, then there's an argument for not at least feeling like you need God, which is kind of the eye of the needle metaphor,
Yeah.
and why it's not wealth that does it, but why being in positions of uh, low risk, you can control your destiny to some degree. And for me, it's been more of just trying to take control. So, at the moment, I am running a company I've never run before, doing work I've never done before, raising money in a way I've never done before. And my conversation with God, because now I sort of see my relationship with God as very much like a friend and a father and a boss, kind of all those things, a mentor. So it's very much like it didn't start that way, but it certainly has become that way. And it's very much like, hey, I'm going to give you all I got, and I realize it's probably about 30 to 40% of what's necessary for this to work. So I need you to make up the rest. If and the only reason in my mind I feel like that works is if I'm actually on the path that I'm supposed to be on, you
Yeah.
know. So I'm constantly sort of checking in and kind of, moving through the dark. Like, I hope this is right, please let me know if it's not.
Yeah.
Um, you know, um, every now and then you get really just clear signs, but most of the time, you're what's that book, Blue Like Jazz? You're co-creating. I really
Co-creating.
believe in that. We're co-creating life with God. We're made to be creators. We're made to be innovators. We're made to have uh, unusual thoughts.
Yes.
And I aspire to that sort of relationship, but that's where I'm being challenged, is sort of giving up control.
That is the hardest thing. I think, for humanity in general because we like control so much. But I think it's actually even harder for men to finally like fully surrender themselves to God because men are fixers, you know, they like to solve problems. They like to have certainty and know what's going on, and to give that up and kind of put yourself in a position to where you're completely surrendered to God and you're listening and you actively trying to follow his guidance and his steps for your path. It's a really hard thing to do. I think a lot of people don't get that until a lot later in life. I know that's the case for me. Um,
Yeah, yeah, and there's an argument that we were made to help fix things too, and so I think the the push here is, let's say no God exists at all, and so then what it really boils down to is you do have to fix everything. And honestly, that sounds kind of boring to me. It's not near as exciting to believe that we could all be connected and that there is greater work at force, that if you move into that, it's not about fixing, it's about being a part of it. And that can be hard for men because a lot of our value is found in the output of what we do. And it's hard to measure things like surrender or serenity. It's hard to measure um things like letting go. That all sounds like defeat in
it sure
in a male
does.
brain often.
Does.
So it feels very opposite of how we're made to be. So I don't know, it's always a struggle, but I think there's this really beautiful push and pull with it.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. So I would like to kind of go back. I don't know how far, but there was something that happened in your life that got you into the music business. Um, Tell me about that. And I would imagine at some point in time you did think, and it was, I know, I fully believe that that was part of your path to get to where you are now, and part of your calling, but kind of how did that happen? And how did that transpire?
Yeah, I mean, because we get to talk about spiritual things on this podcast, which is very rare for me, that for
Yeah.
me to talk about this side of my life. So I'm excited to be able to do that. I think it's important to note that I was raised very conservatively. I mean, my mom and dad did the best they could. My dad was an AA, so he was definitely more into the Richard Rohr side of things. And my mom, came up through the Baptist and evangelical and was homeschooling us. So it became more and more rigid. This is just definitely no shot against her, but it it became very religious. So very like rule based,
Mhm.
very us and them, very God was, is very hell or heaven, very dualistic in nature.
Right.
And and so, I grew up in the beginning fairly judgmental of other people that were not like me. And that's
Okay.
really the outcome of legalistic religion, is
Right.
what we see. And so, but there was one thing that was happening to me as a kid, is that when I would play music, I would feel connected to what we call God. Like whatever, like I'd feel connected to this loving, powerful creator that was very different than what was being described to me,
Yeah.
through the interpretation of it all. And so I gravitated towards music. I loved how it made me feel that connection. And I felt like I didn't have to understand everything to feel okay, you know, and
Yeah.
and largely that's where my relationship with God, or a real relationship, began to develop, was through this sort of esoteric, hard to define experience, very experiential. And then as a teenager, so I started, I was classically trained pianist. I was taking lessons for that, and
Okay.
watched all these other kids get a lot better than me because they could read music faster.
Yeah.
And I was the first drummer in a church because
Oh,
at
cool.
one point drums were considered satanic in some churches.
Are you
And
serious?
oh yeah, and
I
so
didn't know that.
they introduced drums by me playing it on a keyboard because it wasn't a real drum set, so maybe people wouldn't get offended. And so that led me into, I found a mentor at another church, a guy that wrote music and led the music there as a band, and he had a beautiful soul, and he sort of taught me how to songwrite and how to lead people in this experience of connecting with God through music. And so worship at a church, whatever we call it, was never about singing songs for me. It was
Mhm.
always about this potential like connection you could make that was like super magical. It's like being on a
Yeah.
date, falling in love, like all those things. And that, like, I thrived on that. And you couldn't achieve it every time, and not everybody achieved it, but when you could, it became like another worldly experience. And so as a teenager, that really got ingrained in me, to do that. And so I ended up, like, long story short, as this relationship began to develop, all of the religion began to fall off. All of the
Yeah.
kind of legalism, I felt a more confidence in this relationship that I was developing, that, like, you know what, that doesn't look right to me. That doesn't feel good. That doesn't
Mhm.
feel right to my soul. And it wasn't that it just, oftentimes it's an interpretation of something that might be right for somebody else, but maybe not for you. And so as I began to fall off, I moved to Phoenix to actually be the worship leader at a church for the first time. And within months of that happening, my father suffered from uh, bipolar disorder.
Okay.
He ended, um, he took his own life when I was 18 years old.
Okay.
And that sort of, the reason he did uh, was he got off his medication. And the reason he got off his medication is people at church had sort of convinced him that if he believed enough to for God to heal him, if he had
Yeah.
enough faith by getting off, and so he got off his medicine because
I
he
have
wanted to
chills
have
just
enough
thinking
faith.
about that.
Yeah, and granted, during this time, and probably still, the church today struggles with mental health. They want to call a lot of this stuff demonic or some sort of character problem, when it's literally chemistry in a brain
Yeah.
for a lot of this
Yeah.
stuff. Not all of it,
How
but a lot of
how
it.
dangerous.
Yeah, and so I became very angry at that point, at this sort of like institutionalization of people without like education. And so I went back home. I tried to lead music at a church again, and I was getting very, the first church I did that at, which actually the one in Phoenix, I was praying and I said, God, I've had a really shitty day, and you can bleep me out.
No,
And when
it's
I was
okay.
praying, and they fired me for saying that. And I'm like, why? Well, that's how I talk. Like, why can't I
Oh,
pray that way? And
so
then
you're
the
praying,
next,
like, on stage
yeah,
and you
yeah, yeah,
okay, okay.
yeah. And
Oh,
so,
that's terrible.
and I'm like, well, I thought we're supposed to be real here. I didn't realize we were supposed to like kind of filter who we are. And so then the next church I tried to lead at, when I came back home after Dad had died, the microphone had shocked me, and I said the F word, in front of the entire congregation. And they were just like, Casey, we don't feel so safe with you up there. And so, with all this stuff having happened, I was like, you know what? This, whatever this is definitely not for me. And I went and started a rock band.
Okay.
And
Okay.
so that was, to answer your question, that's what entered me into the rock band space. I didn't lose my relationship with God, and I didn't stop being a spiritual person, but I certainly went into this direction where I was angry. with the world. I was angry that sort of I felt let down by my
Mm.
father dying, and then eventually 3 years later, my brother also taking his life. So I was
Mm.
I was just pretty much a middle finger to reality, and even though I couldn't not believe in God because I'd already experienced all these things, I could definitely tell him to F off. And I
Okay.
did that for many years without losing a relationship, so to speak. It was more like, I'm mad, you know?
Yeah.
And and so that really sent me into I was looking for a place where I could be fully and wholly accepted. And the best place I found that was in a rock band, in the bars, in the strip clubs,
Mm.
in the people you could imagine, because they did not care who
Yeah.
I was, how I was, if I was damaged, because God, I am, and I was. And
Yeah.
and it became one of the most beautiful and self-destructive places for me during the beginning of my musical career. So that was sort of like that's me in my like mid 20s,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
that's kind of where where everything kind of that was the rock bottom, so to speak.
So the beautiful yet self-destructive rock bottom.
Yes. Yeah.
So what part so okay, so I can imagine first of all, I think it's really beautiful that coming from such legalistic upbringing, you were able to, from what it sounds like, almost find out who Jesus really is, uh, by yourself, like, on your own, which I think that's pretty amazing and beautiful itself, and I love how you then kind of established music as your way to connect to God. I think that's really beautiful, and hopefully that's still the case for you today.
Oh yeah.
Um, yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
But I'm sorry to hear about both your dad and your brother. I think that's I have a problem with the fact that the church told your dad that he could that he was good enough with God to not need any medication. I have a real problem with that. I my dad was a
It's a
doctor,
hell of a
so
fleece.
yeah. I mean, that's and
Yeah.
that's really interesting, because of what you do today too, but, I grew up with my dad who was a doctor, and so I do believe that God heals and Jesus heals, and that is a real thing, and he can cure anything, but we also need medication. There are chemical imbalances in our brains, and there are things in our bodies that need help, and, like
Medicines are miracles too, we
yeah,
just
I
happen to figure
mean,
out what the science is. So it's
you you
yeah,
have
I mean,
to have that.
that was hard. And I will say, one of the things that struck me, and it strikes me today too, is when you read the Bible, when you read about what Jesus said, what you see is someone that welcomes the stranger, someone that really is focused on love, not a rule based relationship, but focused on like a long term, a path of healing,
Yeah.
not like you're fixed tomorrow, but a
Yeah.
path of healing. And just when you read these sort of metaphors that Christ puts out there, you begin to get a view of unconditional love and what like blessed are the poor in spirit. Like the Sermon on the Mount stuff
Yes.
is one of the
Yes.
things that like my dad actually used to read to me when I was a kid, and
Yeah.
it always struck me because it seems so opposite of how our world works, where it's like get more and get what's mine. And this was all about like giving and letting go, and that there's this sort of this return that you're not even really concerned about, you know and And that was very different than what I was seeing, at least in the institutional churches that I had been a part of, and was kind of wondering, is like, am I crazy? Like, is this just how this is? And so I really, in order to find who I am today, I really had to deconstruct um, what I believed. Kind
Mhm.
of sort of like it had to get completely all pulled apart and put back together for me to realize, like, no, this is for me. This is right, and there's and so eventually, I went through AA, and that
Yeah.
was I think one of the most impactful things spiritually, because I watched a guy that was an atheist come into AA, and part of your thing when you're trying to get sober is you got to believe that a higher power can fix
Right.
what you're doing, and or can heal you from your addiction, and that's a tall order for an atheist. So how do
Sure
you get an
is.
atheist through that? And so what they decided, I guess, through this program is like, look, it's the reason they used higher powers, try to get, like, let's not, like, everybody, when you say the word God or Jesus, you immediately go to some sort of definition. If you love your experience at a church or as a Christian or whatever, then you have a beautiful definition of that. If you
Right.
didn't, then you have a really dark definition of those words.
Yep.
And so I think for the purpose of getting people through a program, they were getting rid of definition. So they told atheists, hey, we don't care what your higher power is. Make it a chair, make it this group, make it your television, does not matter. But you got to believe, you got to say, that's my higher power and it's going to get me through this.
Yep.
And what was crazy is it worked. And what it showed me was that God was a lot less concerned about our definition of him than he was about our path to becoming who we're truly meant to be.
Yeah.
Because you look at the Paul thing, right? Where he's looking at all the idols or whatever. It's the unknown God. He's like, hey, this is the one we're talking about. So he really doesn't care. He doesn't really
Yeah.
care, like if we get it totally right or whatever on that end. But what he does care about is whether we could actually fully become these beautiful creatures that we were made to be on this planet. And that experience really kind of set me back on a course of love, a course of following a path, loosely, still falling off, still, eating shit.
We always fall
Yeah.
off.
Yeah.
We're always going to be broken people.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a pride and there's actually a beauty to that. I think the I think about kintsugi around that. Like, we've got to stop trying to cover up our cracks. They're
Yeah.
actually part of the beauty that makes a human being who they are, and we look at it so dualistically once again. But why can't a weakness be beautiful with, in a spiritual path? It does. It's part of why
Yeah.
you need God,
Well, yeah,
so
to go back to the Sermon on the Mount, he doesn't call the people who are living perfect lives, who are, like the Pharisees were, which would kind of reminds me of your upbringing. It's
yeah,
it's not
very
it's
much
not
so.
those people that he's calling. He's calling the broken and the poor in spirit. He's calling the ones that actually need mercy and love, who feel alone and at their like they're at the end of their line. He's calling all of those people who feel shame and embarrassment. It's not the perfection. It and I think getting closer to, you know, one of the keys I think is that we always need to rely on him. We always need to depend on him. And if we're living perfect lives, then what do we need him for? So there's always going to be growth. There's always going to be our path is always going to continuously evolve, I think, in a way to where we'll have, little broken pieces, and we know that we need to consistently depend on him.
Yeah, and I think, was it Thomas Merton, I think, that said, or it could have been another guy. It says we're like an onion, and that every time in any one of our paths of self-development, no matter what you believe or who you are, you figure like, okay, I got to work on my anger, let's say, or my
Mhm.
patience. You work on it and you're like, cool, I think I'm actually patient now. And then now once that layer is undone, you find another layer.
Yes.
So I just don't think that there is ever going to be it's progress, not perfection. It's the always undoing and rebuilding of ourselves that is sort of, I mean, and as an artist, that makes that actually is the most beautiful art one could make, is that it is constantly reshaping itself and becoming, it's destructing and constructing, becoming more and more beautiful during that journey, and
Yeah.
I think that's how we're actually, I think that's what life is, and
Yeah.
and that makes it, to me, if I didn't have that, I would never have gone on this journey with Rose, or certainly not had the courage to, was to realize that to become, you actually already are who you were truly meant to be. You're just starting to realize it,
Yeah.
and that sort of uh that like kind of acceptance gives, I think, humans courage to step outside their comfort zone and go kind of into the unknown in that way.
I agree with you, and unfortunately, again, as humanity, we don't like the unknown. We don't most of
No.
us, some people do, I
Yeah.
guess, but
It's scary for
it
sure.
is scary, and that's how the enemy works too, to keep
Yeah.
us from finding our purpose is by keeping us in our comfort zone with our distractions that
Absolutely.
he knows we like. And to be able to shut that out and really listen to God so you can take the appropriate steps that he's, I truly believe that even though we don't know exactly what we're going to become at the very end, I think he gives us the right steps and pieces along the way if we listen. So yeah, so take me
Agreed.
to Rose and how did she come to be and what was that like? And I have a lot of questions.
Yeah, so I mean, I got married at the height of my career, I had a couple of hits on the radio, video on VH1, and I married a girl I knew when I was a kid, and everything seemed to be fine. I have my first daughter, Weston, 30 hours of labor, but a dad and a daughter, that, I don't know, that relationship I've never really experienced. If I'm honest, I don't know if I've ever unconditionally loved somebody until I had my daughters.
Yeah.
And it made me want to be a better man. Just like getting married or being in a relationship can sort of compel you to be a better version of yourself. Having
Mhm.
children, I think, also does that. And but when Rose was born, she was born different. She began to fall on her face when she was trying to walk. Like I said, she had a few words she could say. She lost her ability to talk. I'd have to give her enemas. And then we ran a genetic sequence, and the neurologist said, Casey, your daughter has an ultra rare genetic disease. There is no cure. There's nothing we can do. Good luck.
Yeah.
And if I hadn't experienced all this other stuff I just told you about, my reaction probably would have been very different. The
Yeah.
middle finger would have come back up. You know, why? Why did this happen to me? Why did this happen to my daughter? Because, as a dad, your job is to protect your kids, like
Mhm.
at the risk of your own life. I'd
Right.
have zero problems throwing myself in front of a moving vehicle to save my children. But there was no moving vehicle. There was no monster to kill. It was a tiny little nucleotide, a change in a tiny little gene. So, what was required of me was to learn drug development, was to raise money, was to build a lab, was to figure out if we could solve this problem for her. But what I didn't realize was that God was actually putting me on a path that I had wanted to be on since I was a kid. I'd always wanted to be in science and innovation. I just
Okay.
chose music at some point in my life because I saw a guy on TV that, was in a music video. I'm like, man, that sounds cool. Like maybe I can do that. And So I was playing in a band. I had a record deal from Sony sitting on my desk to sign, like, but I knew I couldn't do both. And so I prayed about it, and I felt deeply in my soul that it's hard for me to talk about because it was a death of everything that I was. I'd
Yeah.
spent I'd spent decades building a successful music career. It's all I ever wanted to do in my life, at least so I thought. But with my suffering child sitting there, knowing that I couldn't have both, I knew I needed to die to myself, my identity, and
Mhm.
take on a new path that I had zero understanding of. Nobody cared about me. Nobody knew. Like I had no connections, no money, nothing to try to
Yeah.
do this like impossible work. But I can tell you that I felt such a strong feeling, and still do, that God was saying, like, Casey, I got you. And I know what that feels like. Like I know what what being gotten feels like.
Yeah.
And so you know, doesn't mean I haven't worked my ass off. That's not what that means. It just means that it's the extra courage
Yeah.
that I think one needs to leave their entire legacy and career behind and start all over for something that seemed impossible, you
It
know.
does seem impossible. It does seem
Yeah.
impossible. But I imagine, and I imagine most people in your position would not have taken. I don't think they would have even come up with the idea, let alone acted on it. Something that's seemed so impossible, but you had God on your side, and you had. So I was thinking, as a father, going back to the whole thing about men, wanting to be able to fix everything, especially for their children. Um, Knowing that Rose couldn't be fixed. What does that do to you internally, like before you decided to do this? And maybe that's why you ultimately decided to do this, because you still wanted to fix it with God's help. And I'm just wondering, like, what do you feel inside when you know you can't fix it?
Yeah, I mean, I think this you're actually nailing it on the head. You know, I wanted to fix it, but I also need to be practical
Hmm.
in what the old AA prayer of grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. That's what true peace is. Can I change the genetic code of my daughter? No, I can't, but science can. And so I did a lot of research for the first year after she was diagnosed. And it took a lot of warring, like back and forth with God and and research of my own to be like, is this the right path for me? Other parents had done it. Other parents had raised millions of dollars
Okay.
to design a genetic treatment for their child if it was amenable and get it in a clinical trial. And so I knew that it was actually possible.
Okay. Okay.
And and then what I saw was that this was actually way bigger than Rose because there were thousands of there's actually over 10,000 of these genetic diseases. Most of them are ultra rare, so they all fall under the pharma business model. And you're looking at millions of kids now. It's actually bigger than cancer and AIDS combined. But the science had kind of reached this level to make an impact, but it needed people to put these things together and believe and create a business model, create a system to do this for these kids. And normal people that were getting their PhDs and their MBAs would be like, no, that sounds too hard, you know? Um,
Yeah.
so
It,
that's what I
it
felt really like called to do is like, could I make a medicine for Rose? But where the real mission was kind of came out of that I felt called for is like, No, we're going to cure a bunch of kids. We're going to make a bunch of these medicines, and we're going to build a world in which these children don't need to suffer anymore, you
Yeah.
know? And that at that moment when it became bigger than just about me and Rose, it became a mission, not a not a fix it. And that I think that helped me a lot because I may fail at helping Rose. We have a drug for her now. We're trying to get in clinical trials, but
That's
it may not
incredible.
work, and she may die before I get there. I mean, there's all kinds of things that could happen. But it's not about me. It's
Mhm.
not about, you know, winning. It's just about I felt like this is the right thing to do. And I felt like God said, go do it. And so I'm like, okay, let's go.
I truly think that that is incredible, and I you know, I think I told you when we met up in Austin that my son has a genetic disorder as well. He has a chromosome deletion, 22nd chromosome, but it's just it is people don't realize how many children are dying every year. And yes, it is more so than cancer, from genetic diseases that cause all kinds of different things.
Yeah.
Um, my son's causes developmental delays similar to what autism might look like, and then heart conditions, and Rose's causes what she is dealing with, and like all of these kids are suffering with no cure because there's not enough of them for the drug companies to even care enough to, or have it make sense, I guess, to research and create these medications. So I think it's really a story of hope and, like you said, mission. And um, I think as parents of kids like this, I'm sure that what you're doing, and I know you said other people are doing this too, I guess it sounds like, but it's just incredible. It's just incredible. And for me as a mom of a child like that too, it seems like impossible because there's no cure for what he has either. But then what if there is? And that's just something really special to think about. So as far as like the medication that you have developed for Rose, I assume she hasn't taken it since since it is still in stages of development. But what does that process look like?
Yeah. I mean, so first I started a lab and started raising money and brought in some scientists that had made drugs before, started learning drug development in real time. And these are, these genetic diseases. The idea here is you either fix the mutation, so letters off, or you have a duplication, like more letters, or in some instances, like your son's, you actually have an entirely additional chromosome. So you're, if you think about it, this is the code in which we are designed with. Like this is as this is the end of the road here. This is how
Mhm.
we're made. And so in order to fix these diseases, you got to either maybe delete a chromosome, add one, um, fix a gene, upregulate the gene, downregulate the gene. So it really all depends on what the genetic, you know, um, mutation or what this is not the way we were designed.
Yeah.
It's an error in the code, and we have technology to fix a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them. And so we chose we work with like gene therapies and RNA therapies and DNA therapies, that we made this drug for Rose. We tested it in her neurons, of we grew a dish of our own cells, and
Okay.
we tested it for safety in animals. And so if it passed all those tests and showed that it was working, our next step is to take it into a clinical trial, which now costs millions,
Sure.
to get that in. So um, that's next. And at every step of the way, my number one goal is to still be Rose's dad and Weston's dad. And now I'm divorced. I'm single dad, which is not unusual for families with special needs kiddos. And so every one of these things I think has helped make me a better man, not because I'm special or I'm great, but because it gave me an opportunity to learn and respond in a way that created more capacity than I ever thought that I ever would have. And I certainly never would have done it on my own.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of these things we see in our lives that we see as tragic or bad or evil or rough or trauma actually are opportunities for us um, that can shape who we are in a really beautiful way if we let it. I actually really believe that. Now I don't welcome any more of it. I feel like I've had my fill of
Yeah.
shitty things, but they are the things that have made me. It's the way God has shaped me through those things that I feel proud of.
Yeah. I agree with you. I think that God gives us I almost, we never like to go through struggles. It's never something that we enjoy. A lot of the times we lose people have lost children before, and that's really hard to reconcile. But, I think everybody in the world who does believe in God and Jesus would say that even in their worst struggles, they may now see those as a gift because it brought them into who they were supposed to be or part of that path. Um, I know there's probably always an initial, like, when you're going through something like, "Why me?" But that's actually also a good question. Why me? Like, what is this supposed to teach me? What is the wisdom I'm supposed to gain here? How can I then serve other people with what I've been given by God? And I think that speaks to your story so well. Um, and so I like, do you
Yeah.
see, like, as unfortunate as it is, do you see what Rose has struggled with as a gift in some way? Because
Oh,
it has brought you
100%.
to, like, yeah, that's what I thought.
100%. Now, is she suffering from it? Yeah. Does my family suffer from it? Yeah. If you could ask me, if you could take it away tomorrow or have it never happen, would you do it? 100,
Yeah,
absolutely. I would do
yeah.
it. But has it been a gift? Yes. And I think both of those things can be true. And I think, again, as an artist, the way I look at God and life are probably a little weird sometimes, but what, it's the contrast that creates the adventure for us.
Mhm.
And, instead of us trying to mitigate danger and damage and risk and getting hurt, maybe we're supposed to live. Maybe that stuff is just part of, it's actually an important part of our story that we don't need to be so scared of anymore, and I get to build a biotech company for kids like my daughter. I might even get to hear her say daddy again one day.
Yeah,
um, the next Rose that's born because of the work that we're doing may grow up completely normal. And Rose and I get to give that gift to that family. I mean, I never would be able to say this stuff without this happening. Um, and so you know, you can be grateful and grieving at the same time. And I will say caveat for people listening. I do not believe God causes bad shit to happen to you for you to like get better or like that there's a plan in everything. I think that we have free will.
mhm.
Think that we live in a world full of really good things and really terrible
Really
things.
evil things too.
Yeah, and it is where the miracle happens is how God uses that in your life, how you respond to that, how it builds a relationship with this higher power, this connection to something that's so much greater than the thing you're dealing with right now or the thing I'm
Yeah,
dealing. And that to me is really the magic that I love so much. And uh and it takes away sort of those legalistic or theological arguments of a unkind, unloving father that
Yeah.
is not the dude Jesus was talking about, you know?
No, not at
And
all.
so
Not
that's
at
how I
all.
rectify all of that
I
in for
love that.
me.
I love that. Yeah, people, I think, you hear of the people who feel like God punishes them for
Yeah,
something, and, that's just not the case. God is just full of wrath, like they
yeah,
feel like he was in the Old Testament, but he really wasn't even that in the Old Testament. He was
yeah,
always creating things that would point to Jesus. Like the whole Old Testament points to Jesus, and God is a God of love and faithfulness and direction and structure and mercy and forgiveness. And we have to remember that.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so I'm curious if your career in music and like building that for so long has been able to like were you able to carry some of the wisdom that you gained from that whole experience like in like the management side of it to running a biotech company?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. One is my capacity to fail. Um, Meaning like failure in music was just basically every single day
Mm.
until it wasn't, you
Yeah.
know? And
Yeah, I
so
guess so.
you had to live in a space of people ignoring you, like playing to a bartender with nobody there or playing to a full house where people didn't care at all about your music. So you had to live in this space where you just had to believe in what you're doing, um, with a level of grit that is you can't read about in a book, you know.
Yeah.
And the other, I think, is in the music business, I tried to control everything. I tried to be the guy.
Mhm.
And what I know now that I cannot control everything and that I don't really care about being the guy. What I care about is is moving the thing forward in the way that I believe it's supposed to, or that I'm supposed to help it do that. And
Yeah.
so now, you know, I've surrounded myself with people smarter than me, more experienced than me, and I don't need to be the smartest guy in the room. I don't need to be the guy with the light shining on him anymore in order for me to feel value, because my value doesn't come from this mission. My value doesn't come from curing Rose like it did from selling records or being on stage or selling out a theater. My value was coming from that stuff. And that's not that's not a measure of a man,
Right.
you know? And I think now the success that I have is not going to measure me because I know where my value comes from. I know I'm this incredible, beautiful creation that that is constantly evolving, just like you are, and just like the next person is, whether they know it or not. You
Yeah.
know, and that gives me a level of capacity and confidence to be a better leader, um, to have more courage, to not take things so personally. You know,
That's a hard one.
yeah, that's a hard one. And I just, you know, I just pitched, I had my pitch deck in front of some folks the other day, and they had a bunch of things they thought should change on it. And I was sort of chuckling. I'm like, man, 15 years ago, I would have been so offended by this. I would have felt
Yeah.
like my value was being attacked, you know. And it's
Yeah.
like, no, man, my value didn't come from this. And I, that freedom, you know, when our value is not coming out of our career or the thing we do or the output of it, I do think it puts us in a place that we can actually really learn and grow, you know.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't know if, it sounds like at some point your identity became like what you were like on stage or what you were producing music-wise, what videos might be out on VH1, that I think people so easily make their identity the thing that they attribute, like, or define success being. And that's
Yeah.
a huge mistake because, yeah, that puts you in a very vulnerable position to where that determines your level of happiness or sadness or perceived failure or any of those things. And when you attach your identity to who you are in God, you have the highest level of confidence and you're able to do things like you're doing in a humble way, staying grounded to him. And you're not trying to be something for the wrong reasons. Your motive is true and good, and you care more about impacting people and bringing glory to God than anything else. And I think that is true as of
On the best days,
on
I
the
will
best
put a
day.
caveat that some days it is my value and I take everything personally. I don't think any of this development's in a straight line,
Yeah.
but most days when I'm reminded, when I'm connected, I'm free to do the work without the ownership. It's sort of like, are we willing to take our gifts with an open hand? Are we willing to move life where a person or a thing can be in your hand without you having to hold it so tight? Your relationships, your children, your career. I gotta say, I mean, it's hard, but I do think that that's how we're meant to operate. Not that we don't care or that we're not passionate or that we're not work, because I'll tell you, I work my butt off to do this.
Oh, I can only imagine.
But I think that freedom, I think when he says my burden is light, what he's talking about is that you don't need to create this value for yourself. Like, it is going to be created while you move through life and do the next right thing. And that some things will be taken from you, some
Yeah.
things will be given to you. And we have to be okay with that if we're going to be, happy, joyous, and free.
I totally agree. And I love how you mentioned the open hand thing. I think again that goes back to surrendering and being in that consistent state of like letting go to God. I think that's the only place we can truly become everything we're supposed to be. You know, I just one quick example, even, and I want to ask you something about Weston too, as I say this, but I have two older girls too. So they've always been the big sisters of the special needs kid. And, but, you know, since I couldn't control maybe what was happening with his health, I went through a long period of time where I wanted to control everything that they did because that was the one thing I could control. So I think for a while I became a really controlling parent. And it wasn't until I let go completely and kind of, especially with my 17-year-old, gave her to God so he could be her father, not me. That was when like everything just fell into place. But that's when everything falls into place for us with God too, is when we let life go to him. And that's, like I said, when our confidence rises and our anxiety decreases. And it's a really beautiful thing. So I wanted to ask you, like, how has Weston been through all this and what do you think she's gained?
Yeah. So Wes and I have been connected at the hip since she was born, and I have parented her differently than I was parented. So maybe what I did was right. Maybe what I did was how I've been parenting was wrong. But I have been incredibly transparent with her about life. I have not tried to shield her from the truth.
Mhm.
And also, I have not tried to force her to believe or be anything, you know. But she grew up fast. Having a special needs sister meant less attention because her little sister's getting all the attention. It meant a divorce, it meant um, feeling alone sometimes and then needing to voice that. I feel alone. and those are hard things to hear because you feel like a failure as a parent when you know that your kid feels like there's some suffering that you either missed, could have prevented, you know. But over the years, I think this has given her the ability to be so empathetic to others. And she's still learning to be empathetic to herself, but she is responsible. She is a leader. Um, and she loves people deeply. And I don't know that her character would have been so organically created that way without Rose, and I posted some videos of Wes over the years and I couldn't be more proud of her. She's 12 now. Now, all the hormones are coming. They come a lot earlier these days too, than they used to. So
I do,
she,
yeah.
there's a little bit of less time with dad than we used to have that I'm still
Yeah.
kind of trying to accept. But I have no doubt that she's going to thrive. And I know that being a sister to Rose had a lot to do with that.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Yeah, I think that's really beautiful, and I agree. I think the older siblings of any special needs, it seems to make sense that they would grow up to be more empathetic and really see people, the way Jesus might see them. Um, I think that's really special. So, two kind of last question, three last questions. Um, what is next for you? Like, what is on the horizon with Alpha Rose? What are you building right now? I know you're still doing the drug that will help Rose, but what else are you doing? Like, what is the next big project? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so we've got 6 drugs now, like Rose's, in our pipeline, and we um, we have AI that we've built that can design these drugs in minutes now, and so that is what used to take us months of work. Now I can actually do from my phone in like an hour, and
Wait.
it,
Wait, so I just want to be able to understand this correctly. So
yeah,
so you see a kid who, let's just say there's a kid who lives down the street and he
yeah,
has a rare genetic disorder and nobody knows how to cure it because it's so rare. You
yeah.
could take him and kind of see what his DNA structure is and just figure out how you could actually restructure it to where he wouldn't have this problem anymore.
Yeah, yes, kind of. So you need to have a genetic sequence, of a person to start.
Mhm.
So if your kid has severe autism or has missing developmental milestones, go get a genetic sequence. Most autism, I mean, people argue like half of autism. I think most severe autism is genetic. And so
Yeah.
we just haven't identified all the mutations, but there's like over 1,000 genes now that are associated with it.
Okay.
So once you get your genetic sequencing done, we take that because it's your DNA, it's your code, and we decipher that code based on all the different technologies out there, all the different information around biology and genetics, and we can determine with a level of probability what the best type of treatment to develop is.
Okay.
Some of these types, like gene therapy, are fairly advanced. Like the type we use are called antisense oligonucleotides. They're little RNA drugs or little short strands of RNA or DNA that are like a band-aid on a gene to fix it. And so if that can fix it,
Mhm.
if it's amenable to that, which are our initial agents, so we've got like a dozen agents that can tell us that amenability. And that used
Okay.
to take us, 40 to 80 hours of work to do
Okay.
to get to that answer. Now it takes us 5 to 10 minutes.
That's
And
incredible.
yeah. And so if that happens, then we have an AI design tool that will design this. So in a gene, you can imagine a gene like a train and all these different letters stretching across. And so your drug is about 20 little letters long. And, what the way they've been doing it is designing thousands of these to walk all the way down the gene to figure out
Okay.
which one's going to work. Some of them are toxic. Some of them won't work at all. Some of them are going to hit some other gene because they have the exact same design. All these different parameters, they fold funny. So some will actually work, some won't. So
Okay.
we put all that data together. And now what used to take us, a month of work, we can do in about an hour with our tool, and it can come up with the best designs for that drug. And we can synthesize it and have it in the lab in under a week. And
Gosh.
and so what now, and this is very new, like this is cutting edge to be able to think that we could design personalized medicine this fast. But
Mhm.
that's actually what Rose has brought us, is this idea that maybe we could design genetic medicine specific to our own biology and our own genes. And maybe that's going to create a better healthy outcome for longevity, heart disease, cancer, you name it.
Yeah.
It's, most stuff is caused by genetics anyway. So that part I'm really excited about developing. My greatest challenge this year is raising my next round. I
Mhm.
have to raise so much money to do this, and I've got to find the right investors. If the wrong investors came onto this, they would rape and pillage our company, sell it for, half a billion, $1 billion to a pharma for some whatever thing, and then move on. But that's not
Yeah.
why I'm here, and so I have great investors right now. We've raised like $5 million, and that's more money than I've ever raised,
It's incredible.
and now I've got to raise 15 million, and I've got to find the right mission driven investors that want to make obviously a return, want to make a great return, but also really care about the outcome of
Yeah.
what their investment does. And I'm,
Yeah.
you know, not everybody mixes their morals and ethics with their capitalism. You know,
Yeah, I
I
would
don't
say not a lot
understand.
of people do.
Yeah, yeah. So it's not an easy find, and I get scared sometimes that like I'm going to fail simply because those people that I know are out there I just couldn't get to in time.
Yeah.
And so I think my greatest challenge is the serenity or surrender of that process, to believe that the right people are going to come at the right time. And I'm just going to work my tail off, to find
Yeah.
them.
Well, I think that's really incredible. What you're doing is not only life-changing in this generation, but I would imagine for many generations to come. It's truly, miraculous in my mind. Thank you for everything you're doing and all of the hard work you're putting in. Um, I will definitely keep Rose and, of course, AlphaRose Therapeutics in my prayers, for many
Thank you.
reasons. So my second to last question is just, briefly, throughout all of your story, music to Rose to this company, what have you seen so brightly about God's character that you may not have realized before today? Like what about God's character just shines so brightly throughout your story?
One is second chances, feeling an immense amount of freedom from all the shame and self hatred
Mm.
that I had grown up in. And so that we get do overs, you know, and that brings a lightness to it. And I think the other is that, um, that time is sort of irrelevant, to God. That we think in days and months, but imagine creating a human race. Imagine thinking of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of years, like hundreds of millions of years. We can't fathom. We can't fathom. We have to have this construct of time for us to understand. Have some sort of capacity of defining something.
Yeah.
But when you let go of time and you let go of this need or this value for the work that you do in this tiny planet and this tiny blip of time, you feel a freedom, almost like a kid,
Yeah.
and in some ways, I feel like I'm becoming more and more of that. At least I hope I am, in this process. And I think that's the biggest surprise for me as an adult,
Mhm.
is that life isn't what I thought it was going to be, but it's also not as serious as I had taken myself for. You want to know, like, I don't have a purpose. You don't, go do the right next thing. That's your purpose. Like, we don't
Yeah.
need, there is no destination. It is only the journey. And I think that part for me makes it exciting. It's okay that I don't know everything, you know?
It is. And like you said before, I don't know if it would be a good thing for us to know everything, you know?
Yeah.
So thank you. Thank you so much for sharing everything that you have. And I just want to know, how can people find you? How can people learn more about Alpha Rose, learn more about you? What is the best way?
Yeah, I mean, you can always find me on the LinkedIn. I graduated from Facebook in my band days to now LinkedIn in my biotech
I
days.
don't think anybody uses Facebook anymore.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I remember we were top 10 on MySpace when MySpace came out. So if that
Oh, that's
doesn't date
awesome.
me, but you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find us at alpharose.com. Um, we're looking for people to help and to move this mission forward. But I thanks for having me on this, and may we all find joy in the journey that is ahead for us, regardless of the tragedy and trauma that we experience along the way, and may we become all that God made us to be, or as we're becoming all that God made us to be. I think it's a beautiful, life becomes a beautiful, beautiful journey when 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 that realization happens, I think.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. Your story is so beautiful, and thank you for again for all the work you're doing. Um, it gives people a lot of hope, and you're definitely making God so proud of you. Um, thank you so much, Casey, and thank you all for joining us. And please reach out to Casey at alpharose.com and see about helping. That would be absolutely amazing.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Casey, and God bless. And we'll see you guys in about 2 weeks. Bye.
Bye.